Hey, very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Sean.
This is Alex.
And you're listening to another and you're listening to another episode of Coast of Kings Radio. And today we're talking about is it our favorite manufacturer?
Well, yeah.
Is that a thing we can say on the air in public?
We've been saying that for years.
So today we're talking about none other than Vekoma, our good little Dutch steel plant turned roller coaster manufacturer. And we're going to talk all things about its history and the rides they have created and everything that you can possibly imagine. And of course, there'll be lots and lots of roller coaster talk. For those that are interested in following along with some of our stuff, once we get to the roller coaster part of our episode, which will start shortly after our introduction, the roller coaster database Vekoma overall glossary will be a good thing to follow along if you don't know some of these models and these pictures or you're curious of like...
For those of you playing at home.
For those of you who play with this at home, Monopoly team, that's a great place to look. We're not going to go in the order that necessarily is found on RCDB, and there's some stuff that I think they have indexed not as nicely as I would compartmentalize, so it's not going to be completely on the same line, but it's definitely a great place to look along if you are interested in doing so. But let's talk about a little bit of history.
All right.
And Alex, are you ready for this? Because Alex is a history buff. He's like the history teacher of this episode.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I embrace that label. A history teacher.
The history teacher of Coast of Kings Radio.
Coaster history. I tell people I'm a roller coaster historian, and they're like, "You made that up," and I'm like, "Yeah." All right, Vekoma started off as creating farming equipment, which is so Dutch. Of course, it was a farming equipment company. And then they shifted to mining machinery for coal mining in the 1950s. After the Dutch mines closed. Wait, why did they close? Is there
I don't know why they closed. I didn't do that much research.
Well, now I need to know. Well, I guess I'll look it up later. But after the Dutch mines closed for reasons, the company shifted to steel pipe manufacturing in 1965. They then entered the amusement industry in the 1970s when Aerodynamics contracted them to manufacture steel track and supports for European installations.
So imagine that, though. Like, you're over here doing the farming thing, and then you do the mining thing, and the mine shuts down, and you start creating, like, pipes for all sorts of industries. And then some manufacturers approaches you and says, like, hey, girls, I need some coasters built in Europe. You mind assisting? And then suddenly that kind of launches you into this, product that you are today, which is just a coaster manufacturer. Crazy.
And it just, it was kind of necessary for Aero. I mean, they were, trying to take over the world, and it was a great vehicle for them to expand their reach into the European market. They were basically, Vekoma got their start as an outsourcing hub for Aero. But then, as we would quickly find out, they had their own ideas for rides as well. Let's see. Where are we? 1979. Vekoma enters the market on their own. They opened 3 roller coasters in Europe under the name Vekoma Rides Manufacturing BV.
Which stands for Besloten Vennootschap, which is actually just kind of like a private limited company, a.k.a. company.
I'm glad you said
it
and not me.
I know, right? You probably not been able to pronounce that if you knew how to write that anyway. Anywho's.
So roller coasters were their first foray into the industry, actually, which is not actually always the case with legacy manufacturers. Intamin started with tower rides. Aerodynamics was a carousel manufacturer, but Vekoma's first amusement industry foray was roller coasters. However, they quickly diversified their market by launching a Ferris wheel division in the early 1980s. In fact, their first Ferris wheel was the Ferris wheel at the World's Fair in Knoxville in 1982. It was the largest Ferris wheel in the world at the time. Their production model Ferris wheel, which is a 50-meter wheel, was similar to the similar big Ferris wheel product that Schwarzkopf was offering at the time, but at only 51.5 meters, it was noticeably smaller than the new Vekoma version. But if you've ridden the Ferris wheel at Six Flags Great Adventure or at Cedar Point, those are notable Schwarzkopf wheels in the States. And then Vekoma's standard wheel was peppered throughout the United States as well. You would have found the World's Fair one, the OG from Knoxville, at Darien Lake up until a couple of years ago. Six Flags New England, Riverside, their giant Ferris wheel was a Vekoma. Kentucky Kingdoms, for me, I feel like is the most
That one is
famous.
super iconic.
I feel like that's the most iconic. Well, that one, and then like the Maury's Piers, the Mariners Pier Ferris wheel, those are all identical Vekoma 50-meter Ferris wheel designs. But they've gone on to build even larger Ferris wheels for places like Delhi, India. I've ridden the Ferris wheel in Hong Kong in the harbor as a Vekoma. I've ridden that. The Ferris wheel for Navy Pier, which is now the Branson wheel in Branson, Missouri. That is also a Vekoma wheel. Excuse me. So, yeah, they were a prolific provider of Ferris wheels well into the 90s. The company was then spun off into a separate company called Dutch Wheels, which remained a subsidiary of Vekoma up until 2018. It became its own independent
Why is the
company.
first thing I think of when I think of Dutch wheels like bicycles?
I think of windmills
Interesting.
for some reason.
Anywho.
And then there's we have more discussions about the Ferris wheel stuff. There was some more partnerships and things. Vekoma did a lot of subcontracting. In fact, I would say that is one of their biggest legacies, is not just the work that they did, but the fulfillment work that they did for other firms. Everyone knows by this point that like Vekoma and Aerodynamics had a major agreement with each other and for fulfillment ends, but that was actually just one of many. They had several product lines in addition to the more notable coaster and Ferris wheel product lines. They did cycle railways, which those aren't very common in the United States, but throughout Europe and Asia you'll find little monorail cycle type rides. Efteling has one. Horse Pedalo at Bobbejaanland is probably the most iconic one that we've ridden.
Yeah,
they built 2 River Rapids rides, both in Belgium for Bellewaerde and Walibi Holland.
Walibi Holland is in the Netherlands, thank you.
Oh, wait. Oh, yeah. For some reason, I thought Walibi Belgium was the other, but I wrote right there that it's Holland. Don't listen to me. Pay me no mind. They had a lot of success with the big players, Disney and Universal, with their giant flume rides. Disneyland Paris' Pirates of the Caribbean, as well as all 3 of the Jurassic Park River Adventure rides for Universal were built by Vekoma. Vekoma also built Phantom Manor. Like, if you're a fan of Disneyland Paris, you're automatically a fan of Vekoma. Sorry, I don't make the rules. But, like, almost every ride of substance at Disneyland Paris was built by Vekoma. And even in the studio park, like, their most major roller coaster, their most major attraction, which to me is Avengers Assemble Flight Force, is also Vekoma. And then they also, for our Floridian listeners, you may recall a little experiment at Busch Gardens Tampa called Rhino Rally, which was a multimodal safari / throw ride concept that involved taking a safari through the Serengeti area of Busch Gardens Tampa, and then the vehicle would stop on a bridge, and then the bridge would like break and send you floating down the river, at which point then you would hit a dam of some sort, and then your vehicle would drive out of the water and back to safety. Really amazing concept, and like definitely worth the trouble when you think of like Busch Gardens Tampa's proximity to Disney's Animal Kingdom and how badly they really wanted to, fight back against having another zoological theme park in the same region. The ride, as you might imagine, was extremely technologically advanced, and unfortunately the part where the safari, where the Jeep like went on the bridge and became like a flume ride briefly, like, or at least a simulated flume ride, that part didn't last as long as the rest of the ride. It ran into a lot of mechanical issues. That aspect of the ride was retired, and then Cheetah Hunt was built in the former space that was occupied by the water portion of the ride, and the 2 rides actually operated concurrently. Like, if you think of Cheetah Hunt as being the replacement of Rhino Rally, they actually operated together for a few years. But unfortunately, without the water component of the ride, the ride suffered from like dwindling attendance, because that was like the most exciting part. And then they ultimately closed the ride, and then have finally replaced the infrastructure that was set aside for Rhino Rally has now been upcycled into Serengeti Flyer. So that was, I think, one of Vekoma's most interesting concepts. It was a pity that it didn't work out, in the long run. But it was just a great example of Vekoma really trying to push the limits and offer a really great articulated product for their client.
And now we're going to dive into something I think a lot of people forget about even exists in the Vekoma world, and that is the flat ride collection that they've worked on, starting notably in the 80s and throughout the 90s, one of which is the Para Tower.
Yeah, so Para Tower, if you have been to Phantasialand, the Tittle Tattle Tree is a smaller version of their Para Tower. They used to have bigger versions, like there was one in Great Britain. I think there was one in Korea, but those are all gone. The Tittle Tattle Tree is, I think, the only remaining example.
And another ride that I'm not sure if many people know this Vekoma is the Regatta.
There's a few companies that did regatta-style rides. I know Mack has a version of it, but Vekoma did a version for Efteling, which is unfortunately not currently. Not currently. It doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. But it sort of has a Music Express sort of moving element, a circular ride where you sit in boats that travel up and down, and some of them they can rotate backwards and forward and whatnot.
And then another surprise to me was finding out that there's actually swing rides that Vekoma did, or swinging carousels as they call them.
They did they have a variation on a wave swinger, which actually Ewich Gardens. If you've been to Ewich Gardens and noticed that their wave swinger definitely looks different from all of the others, it's because it's Vekoma's, and I think it's their only installation of the ride.
And then there's a ride called the Flash Dance, which the first one we encountered was actually a knockoff version at Happy Valley in Shanghai. But there's also one in Everland that's a real one.
It doesn't even really do anything. It looks like a barber chair. People call it the barber chair ride.
Yeah, it's kind of like a tulip.
And it's just it does look like a tulip. It's it's just a seat that just goes up and down.
Yeah.
It doesn't, and the seat can spin and stuff. But those were only ever built in Asia.
And then there's a Sky Shuttle, which is pretty much a big flying island version of Vekoma that Intamin is known for. People that go to Efteling, you'll know Pagoda is a flying island kind of ride. That's Intamin. And then there's a version that Vekoma did, which there's one in Happy Valley Beijing.
Yeah, I think Happy Valley Beijing, I think might have the only operating one left. I'm pretty sure the one that was actually at Cypress Gardens was a Vekoma. 99% sure. And then one of their more iconic flat rides was the Air Jumper. All of them are gone now, sadly. But they developed a double swing inverter type ride with suspended seats. They actually looked exactly like the vehicles from the Vekoma SLC, just attached to twin hammers. Premier Parks purchased a couple of these for Six Flags New England and Frontier City, respectively. Fuji-Q Highland also had a pretty iconic one called Panic Clock, which was the last operating version of this ride, and then it actually was only recently demolished to accommodate their new motorbike coaster. Their most famous flat ride by far is the Madhouse.
There's so many of them. I'm sure most people listening have probably gotten in contact with one.
Yeah.
Because even the ones at Great Adventure
in Six Flags New England
are also from this product line.
Yeah. This ride is so famous. Vekoma doesn't really do a lot of flat rides anymore. In fact, this might be the only standard flat ride that they still offer. Just because it's just there's so many of these. I can't even count all of the Vekoma ones. The original one was at Efteling, but you'll find them in all sorts of places. Park Warner Madrid has one. Bella Varda has one. It's actually funny because Bella Varda's is themed to Houdini, just like the ones in the States. It's one of the only clues that you could ever have of Bella Varda ever being part of the Premier Parks era, because those three rides are all designed at the same time. But yeah, I think the Madhouse is actually one of Vekoma's proudest legacies and very underrated, at least in the States. There are none in the United States other than those two that we just mentioned, whereas in Europe, they're everywhere. It's every park has one.
Walibi Holland?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, Walibi Holland has one. They're inescapable.
Walibi Belgium doesn't have one, does it?
Phantasialand has one. Doesn't Walibi Belgium have one?
Oh, no, I don't think so.
It seems like something that every park has to have. Yeah, Bella Varda's got theirs. But then they also are famous for developing the the double arm gondola type ride, which I'm basically, if you're familiar with the Huss topspin, what you're familiar with is actually a development of Vekoma's design, where they were the first to create a swinging gondola pitched between two cranks. And Vekoma's versions were cool because the cranks could always spin in opposite directions. They had 3 different versions of this ride. The first one, which was Canyon Trip, was definitely a family ride of sorts, even though it looked really terrifying. And the gondola actually could expand and contract to accommodate the arms spinning in different directions. And then the follow-up to this ride, the Waikiki Wave, would implement an arm with a joint in it. So it had a single static arm, like what you would find on a topspin, and then a single arm that was jointed, and then a larger gondola that could accommodate more people. It was facing forward and backward, like what you would expect from a topspin of sorts. Even like the suspended topspins from Huss have the forward-backward seating arrangement.
That's funny because the traditional ones don't.
Right, yeah. Both of these first 2 iterations of this ride, Canyon Trip and Waikiki Wave, were like pretty gentle. They were terrifying to look at. Like if you came across, like the first Canyon Trips there was one at Maurice Piers in the late 80s. If you were a Maurice Piers person between 86 and 1990, you might remember this thing. Busch Gardens Williamsburg actually had one between 1994 all the way up until Apollo's Chariot, I think. Yeah, I guess that wasn't that long. Like, none of the Canyon Trips operated for very long. They were like attractive to look at and to buy, but like guest experience was never that high. The Waikiki Wave was a famous fixture at Kentucky Kingdom for a long time. Theirs was called Quake, and it had its own little subsection area with like great theming and stuff. But like Fuji Q Highland, Lotte World, Flamingo Land, they all had Waikiki Waves as well. Even Nagashima Spa Land had a Canyon Trip for a while. It's one of the few rides I feel like that Nagashima Spa Land built and then retired, because I feel like Nagashima Spa Land never, ever retires their rides. The third iteration of this ride, the Waikiki Wave Super Flip, was, I think, the most successful, and it was famous at parks like Dream World, Gold Coast, Six Flags Mexico. Wallaby Holland had one for a few years, and then they actually swapped it out for a topspin because it was more reliable, which it's funny to think of anything being less reliable than a Huss topspin. But I digress. Port Aventura opened with one. These were really popular in the mid-90s. They offered a really thrilling, excellent ride experience. I never rode a Canyon Trip, but I did ride the Waikiki Wave at Kentucky Kingdom, which was really cool, but also just like way more tame than it had any right to be. For a ride that was so spectacular and intimidating, it really didn't do much. The Super Flip delivered on the promise of an intense ride experience for such an intense-looking ride, and it actually borrowed the development of the topspin, which, while Huss borrowed the swinging gondola arm shape of the Waikiki Wave to develop the topspin, it was Huss that was responsible for implementing a lock system on the gondola so that the vehicle could rotate while the car was static and could perform flips and such. And so Vekoma then borrowed that implementation from the Huss ride to develop the Super Flip. Super Flips were amazing. All of these rides were really cool. None of them are open anymore because they are super mechanically difficult, and they were super loud too.
Oh, really?
Like,
louder than a topspin?
Yeah, these rides were incredibly loud, and I know more than once an installation of these rides was actually ended because of noise complaints. And then, in addition to all of these flat rides that they developed, like we said earlier, that Vekoma's one of their greatest legacies is actually how well they have worked with other manufacturers to help them bring their products, their designs to different markets. But Vekoma actually built a few Larson loops. Like Larson in the 80s wanted to reach markets in the European fair circuit, so Vekoma provided manufacturing for some of their first generation super loops throughout Europe. Mondial and Vekoma together had a very successful run with the Skyflyer, which was the pretty standard double swinging hammer ride that you would have seen a lot in the 80s and 90s. Fabry had a version of it called Kamikaze. These were very popular rides. Chance's version was called the Ranger. And then like the suspended version of this ride that Vekoma developed the air jumper was also popular from other varieties. I think the Zamperla Hawk rides are probably the most famous of the suspended version of this ride, but Vekoma in the early 80s, along with Mondial, developed a very successful version of this ride with the Sky Flyer. Most of them were overseas, but I think Laurent had one, and Worlds of Fun had one. The Evolution, the Excalibur at Six Flags St. Louis / Six Flags Great Adventure, was a partnership between Ronald Bulsink and Vekoma. Brogent, the Taiwanese manufacturer technology group, partnered with Vekoma to build a flying theater for their showcase park in southern Taiwan, which is also home to the only Vekoma Big Air ride. And finally, Wisdom Rides of the Dragon Wagon fame actually had Vekoma build for them a Chance Rotor style ride called a Gravitron that is actually still traveling on the fair circuit today.
Look at that.
So that is so now you know
the rundown of anything not RCDB related.
So now any ride installation that you want to know about that is not on RCDB, you know about it now.
And then continuing our history real quick. In 2001, Vekoma filed for bankruptcy, which is wild because they had such a wild 90s. And then in 2006, Vekoma formed an alliance with Chance Morgan, which is, of course, the American manufacturer. Chance Ride represented Vekoma in North America, and Chance Morgan manufactured the Steel Tracks for Select projects in North America. During this agreement, Chance actually built 4 Vekoma-designed family coasters.
Wait, which ones?
I'm glad you asked. So they did Hang 10 at Freestyle Music Park, and Iron Horse at Freestyle Music Park, a.k.a. Hard Rock Park.
Yeah, formerly Shake, Rattle, and Roll, and Eagle's Life in the Fast Lane.
Those names were pretty cool for 1 year of operation. And they also did Freedom Flyer, which was their last project here at Fun Spot America, and they did Steel Lasso at Frontier City, which we'll talk a little bit about that model coming up.
Totally seemingly random rides, but I guess Chance provided the fulfillment.
That's just a short window, it's like a 6-year window. And because in 2012, they discontinued doing that.
And that was the only Vekoma mine train with like the standard layout that was ever built in the United States. And now it's gone.
Yeah, that's true. It's so sad, honestly. Yeah. And then shortly after terminating the agreement in 2012, Chance Ride was given the exclusive license for using Dutch wheels to manufacture and sell the R60 wheels, which are one of the models,
the giant one,
in North America under a new affiliate name, Chance American Wheels. It's kind of funny because,
interesting,
even though they're like the Dutch ones,
yeah,
they're just marked as American wheels. It's like building that like German Schwarzkopf coaster at Indiana Beach and calling it the All-American Triple Loop, as if it is nothing American.
I wish they had just called it American Dryer Looping, because that was a great name.
The All-American Triple Loop.
Yeah.
So American. Anywho, and then in 2013, Vekoma signed a deal with the Idaho-based Rocky Mountain Construction, which everyone loves, RMC, and that agreement allowed Vekoma to build on behalf of RMC outside of the North American market. So Untamed was a partial Vekoma project. Mm-hmm. And there are some more projects on the horizon that we have learned about.
Oh, yeah.
And then on March 30th of 2018, Vekoma was acquired by Sensei Technologies, the exact same Sensei that is SNS Sensei.
Yeah.
The good news is, though, because of Vekoma's flourishing at this time already, Vekoma's business model remains completely unchanged after the acquisition, and it just completely operates as a separate entity, with just money / financial ties with Sensei Technologies, but really Sensei has no say in the operation of Vekoma.
Has no sensei.
Has no sensei. And now let's move on
to the meat of this.
To the meat of the episode. It's gonna be a long episode.
This is 23 minutes.
We're gonna find out.
50 seconds of preamble.
Pull up your RCDB girlies because we're gonna talk about all Vekoma products. And the order in which we're doing it is going to be a mix of older classic stuff, kind of tying together themes to make it as coherent as possible, so you guys don't lose complete interest if you're still with us.
You haven't lost complete interest already.
If you're still with us. We're going to start with the Family Coaster, which there's 2 models of the Family Coaster, one of which is Calypso and the other is Horus, and these are new style coasters. For those of you that are just now going to RCDB to join us, you can do this best by going to just type in Vekoma, and then you will find a complete glossary, and then you will find there the 2 roller coasters that are considered the Family Coaster line. This Family Coaster, Calypso, is one of the new models that can be found in several places around the world. The first one was installed in 2022, so really recently at Emerald Park. And really what it is, it's kind of like the old Vekoma roller skater kind of coasters, the old junior coasters, but like a beefier track. So if you look at all the new mall coasters in Asia, which we'll talk about those in a minute, this is kind of like the same track design. There is one called Dino Dash, located in Emerald Park, which is previously Tato Park.
Yeah.
And that was the first one, actually, of the whole product line. And then there's one that opened in Fanta Wild Wonderland this year called Pine Tree Rocket, the exact same model, of course, because this is the Calypso model. And then you have the Honey Harbor that's been under construction for a while at Energylandia, which will be part of the new Choco Chip Creek.
No, that's the name of their mine train.
I thought the whole land was called.
The whole land is Sweet Valley.
There you go, Sweet Valley. And then there's one under construction right now for 2025 as well in Windowland. Do you know what Wonderland is?
No.
I do. It's in France. And that's all we're going to talk about because we got a lot to talk about. And then there's Horus. And Horus is another family coaster from Vekoma that's also a new design. And we find the Horus locations. And the one that we're going to get in the United States, actually, that I'm really excited for, is the Midnight Flyer that's coming to Sandus Village. Which, it's funny because we were talking about this a little bit ago when they announced it. And we just think it's a cute upgrade. To the old Vekoma family coaster, the junior coaster, I should say. But currently, there is actually none that are open yet. So Horus is the newest model. There's also one under construction at Cyclescadea. It's called Twilight Express, and then Vedanta World is also building one as well, and that's located in Mexico.
The layout for the Midnight Flyer is really cute. If you just search Santa's Midnight Flyer in image search in Google, the first thing that'll come up is a full concept of the ride's layout, which is really the only good way to see the ride's layout at this point, because none of the other installations have photos.
And then we're going to talk about the junior coaster, which is really the preceding product lines it is. And I think one of Vekoma's biggest successes. I think especially when you thought about Vekomas in like the 90s, early 2000s, everyone was kind of thinking about like the roller skaters, as we used to refer to them as.
Yeah, the whole product line used to be the roller skater.
But really that's all been lumped together as the junior coaster. And we'll start with the smallest model, which is the 85-meter model. And that's what you find at Six Flags Fiesta Texas, for example, which is just almost like one of those older American-style family kiddie coasters where you just kind of go in like a circular motion with just a couple hops in between. Very, very simple. But then I think the one that most people know is the 207-meter one. There's 27 of them currently in the world. And that includes stuff like Woody Woodpecker and Getch's Go Coaster and Mission to Mars in Germany. And there are so many of these. This is just like the classic small Vekoma roller skater that everyone knows. And then the larger model of that is the 247-meter model, which there's 29 of them.
And that's a hippogriff, flight of the hippogriff, right?
No, actually not. So this is actually the model for the Trans Studio Parks. And Six Flags St. Louis's new rookie racer this mall model with just like, kind of like two big helices and some transitions in between. And they're really just designed for a mall.
Energylandia has one of these too.
Yeah, actually,
Energylandia has
mention every kiddie coaster pretty much mentioned here. Just assume there's one at Energylandia.
It's the same
because they have pretty much all of these. But yeah, so that is the next model up, and believe it or not, there's 29 of them already, and that's because the vast majority of them are all at the Trans Studio Parks in Indonesia. And then the model that you're referring to, there's also 29 of them, and that is the 335-meter model. And that includes Flight of the Hippogriff, for example, at Anzo Adventure.
We've got one in Osaka.
Yeah, we've got Woodstock Express over at Cedar Point for our American listeners.
Oh, yeah.
We have, for my childhood, I had Mine Train at Slagharen. Was a model like that. So they are just everywhere. I mean, I don't even know how.
And this is also the ride layout that the original, like the OG family inverted coasters would base their layouts on.
Exactly, which we will talk about also in a little bit, too.
Yeah.
And then there's also 27 custom design ones, which is really interesting to me because
that's a lot.
In my head, I think, wow, there's always production models, but there really are 27 different custom ones, including Devil's Mine and Fort Fun, which is such a guilty pleasure of mine. I love that ride. And then Wandering's Oaken's Sliding Sleds at Hong Kong Disneyland is open. It's also part of that product. It's also a custom junior coaster. And then Vapor Trail.
Oh, Okie Dokie at Bobbejaanland.
Okie Dokie at Bobbejaanland.
That's
one
a great ride.
There are so many of these custom ones, but I think it's cool
there's
because
the one
in my head there's always
Real Road.
It's mostly just the models, but there really are like a lot of custom ones.
Oh, the one in
Royal
the Oriental,
Scotsman is so good
Oriental
too.
Pearl Tower.
Yeah, Oriental Pearl Tower in the Shanghai financial district.
Royal Scotsman is so good.
And Royal Scotsman is such a good one.
That's the one at
Hansa Park,
the Vekoma family.
And then the Vekoma coaster, the junior coaster inside of Toverlands, in the indoor area. Toast Express is one as well.
Oh yeah.
There's just a lot. And I made myself the promise that I wouldn't list all the coasters in this episode because there's so many.
It's a good.
So we're just going to be giving examples. And then we're moving on.
So many.
On the topic of custom products. Of course, we've got Tron, Light Cycle Run, and Light Cycle Power Run in
the
Orlando and
family.
Shanghai, respectively. We have Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, of course, in both Shanghai and in Walt Disney World as well. It's kind of funny because Magic Kingdom and Shanghai Disneyland really do share two of their newest, coolest coasters.
Both of their major roller coasters are shared with each other.
And I think the coolest thing about this subsection of Vekoma coasters is the agreement / relationship that Vekoma has with the Walt Disney Company and the Disney parks. Because some of the coolest stuff we've seen are all just completely custom ride concepts, designs, track systems, vehicle systems that were all designed, coming from Disney having a vision and then Vekoma delivering whatever product was needed to make that vision. So, of course, you also got Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind, which everyone loves that ride. Really cool. The Omni Coaster, which is rumored / semi-confirmed, I think, for the Tokyo Space Mountain replacement. Not this exact theme, just the kind of coaster. Of course, you've got Expedition Everest, and you've got Big Grizzly Mountain Runaway Mine Cars at Hong Kong Disney, which are the cool, I almost call it like the evolution of a Big Thunder Mountain.
Super mine train, yeah.
Like a super mine train that can have a launch, backwards, sections, big drops, like all the cool stuff. Really neat. And then there was also a project they did with Universal, which unfortunately didn't fare as well. Was the Launch Coaster Dueling, as it's listed as this product name.
Launch Coaster Dueling.
I know, right? What a name. Which is a Battlestar Galactica in Singapore, in Universal Studios Singapore. That eventually it opened up it opened up with 4 cross trains. So what it is a racing sit down, a racing inverted coaster that launch up a lift hill with LIMs. And then do their whole thing. One is non-inverting, one is inverting. And then I guess the trains were just too heavy. They were too problematic.
Yeah, they were
the
having
rides were
stress fracture issues at the joints.
And so then they reduced it down to just 2 across seating. And if I can't remember where I heard this or if this is even entirely true, so don't take this as a complete
truth. With a grain of salt.
If I'm not mistaken, the product that was proposed was actually just 2 across seating to begin with. They wanted higher capacity. They found a way to make it 4 across. It didn't work out, and then they went down and brought it back to 2 across anyway, and now the ride's running fine. I'm not sure how true all that is, but it is for sure now running 2 across trains. It looks kind of cool,
and it
though.
actually, runs.
Because now, I mean, if anyone that knows the franchise of Battlestar Galactica, like having the wings on an aircraft makes a lot more sense than sitting on the wings. So, it looks really cool seeing the flyby now, having the really wide train still, but just having only 2 seats in the middle. But I digress.
Did you notice that the Montaña Russa Tibidabo is listed in here with, the Oddball Family Coaster collection?
I did see that, but I don't necessarily agree, because I really feel like it should be listed with Fofo and Crazy Bats and
it's like the same product line as those.
But we'll talk about that in a little bit. Speaking of custom stuff, I want to move on with the Flying Dutchman line of products. And Fly is, of course, the craziest thing that Vekoma has done, I think, in the category in a long time. Very good ride. Having the train system be versatile enough that you can use it for a dark ride scene or a movie, like a screen scene, and then tilt the trains into a flying position. I think that's really, really revolutionary. And even though RCDB will list it under the Flying Dutchman collection, I still think as of right now it's either completely its own product line or it's one of those custom designs that they've done for a park based on the park's dreams and wishes. I can totally see Van Tasland come up and be like, yeah, I think we kind of want to do this sort of thing. And then they said, okay, say no more. We're going to make it work. So Fly is obviously incredibly spectacular. I'm curious to see if we'll see another one, and if so, where we'll see it. For those that aren't familiar with Fly, it is a launched flying coaster system that has a dark ride section to it. It's in Phantasialand in Germany, and this is such an incredible upgrade to the concept of a flying coaster because of the trains, like the way you board them all sideways in like almost like continuous motion. If they wanted to, they could even apply the moving walkway system to it, not tilting to be in your launch position until you get to the actual launch. There's just a lot of versatility with this ride, and the trains are very long, which I think is both a benefit and like a detractor of the ride experience, because it can really vary on where you're seated in the train, and I feel like the motions are perhaps a little more sluggish than any other roller coaster. But having a launch flying coaster and 2x2, meaning you're always on the outside seat, and then having that incredible theming that Phantasialand adds to the mix, I mean, you can't fight it. Like, it's such an awesome ride.
There's a rumor, this ride feels like a Disney project.
It feels like an Iron Man kind of ride.
In terms of, well, that's just it. I think there was a rumor that this system of ride was actually developed with Disney to do some sort of Iron Man type ride, and then Disney and ultimately passed on it and allowed Vekoma to sell it to other manufacturers. Because when I ride it, I feel like it's like a Tron and Cosmic Rewind caliber.
Oh, totally.
Experience.
Which is why I use that transition. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then talking some more about the Flying Dutchman. I mean, Alex actually saw the very first
the
one being built.
Flying, yeah. Growing up in the Bay Area, Vekoma actually used Great America, Paramount's Great America at the time, as a kind of a test ground for the Flying Dutchman. Like, the whole ride was manufactured and even tested before it was announced, because they knew that they wanted to give themselves time to like really tweak the process. But like, yeah, summer of 1998, summer of 99, I mean, the ride was there and like being worked on actively. Invertigo was the new ride for 98, but like, it wasn't long after Invertigo opened that they started working on Stealth, and that was never even supposed to open before 2000. Like, Stealth actually opened on time, I guess, based on their timeline that they had imagined, but they just gave themselves a really long time to develop it. The ride had a totally different train design at one point that was developed. I mean, it went through quite the process, and in retrospect, it was really neat that like a park had like basically offered Vekoma to not only develop this prototype, but like use the park itself as a plant of sorts.
Well, Great America honestly kind of a really like limit pushing history. It always kind of had really trendy rides, and of course, having Top Gun when it opened was early an inverted game. It was a second or third invert, right?
Yeah.
It had an early era B&M stand up. They were the
Vertigo. They were the first park to have two B&Ms.
Then building this. So like at that time.
Oh no, they weren't. The other Great America was
right, because Iron Wolf still came before.
Iron Wolf. I always forget Iron Wolf is not.
But either way, this was really. I think Great America was really like a good coaster park back then. And Stealth was no exception, and the layout was revolutionary.
It was. I was there
from being an inverted coaster to an upright coaster.
I was there, Gandalf, 3,000 years ago.
Awesome. Yeah, we still have photos.
Was there for? We took pictures on the Sky Ride of them building it. We were there.
We have to go publish
for Media Day.
Yeah, we'll publish.
I was there. We were there. We rode it several times opening year. Remember waiting? We waited like 3 hours for it on opening day. It was so awesome. You just had to be there.
And this model is the 843 meter model, which is the only one ever built. It is very much the prototype. There's things that they definitely changed after the fact, like not having corkscrews. And this went on to be relocated to Carowinds to be named Borg Simulator first, which was obviously Star Trek themed. And then when the acquisition of the Paramount Parks happened and to the Cedar Fair company, that changed to Nighthawk. And it still operates as Nighthawk today. Rumor is it's not even a rumor. The trains for Firehawk, which is a 1018 model, meter model, those trains were actually sent to Carowinds for spare parts / maybe replacing the whole train of Nighthawk. And then there's one left operating a 1018 model, which there were ever only two built, and that is at Six Flags America. Batwing, which I love that ride. Batwing is so good, so underrated.
It is so good.
It's way out in the boonies of the park. Like good luck getting there, and like from the entrance, it's so far away.
I love the changes that they made between the two ride layouts because like Stealth was really cool, but there was definitely room for improvement. And I feel like the changes that they made with the larger with the Batwing X-Flight layout are like wonderful and substantial.
Because what they kept was really what worked the best anyway. Yeah. Like having, because I like when you get up there, like you're on your back on the lift hill. On the Flying Dutchmans, and then you flip over as you crest the lift hill.
Flipping over at the top of the lift.
And then suddenly it's like, wow, now you're really high up, and it's like this wow moment, and then you dive straight down to the ground in like a straight down drop. And then a giant horseshoe turn, which on rides, on the B&M counterparts, like Star Sky Ripper and Tatsu, those are some of the best moments of the rides, and the Flying Dutchman invented that moment. And then you flip back on your back, and you do like a big swooping turn on your back. After which you do a vertical loop. It's on your back. Just like the second half of that vertical loop, like looking down and diving down onto your back is it's like the moment of the pretzel, but this reverse operation.
Speaking of Starry Sky Ripper, I know we've talked about this before, but we want to remind everyone that Starry Sky Ripper is basically a Flying Dutchman.
Yes, it's like literally like the order operations on the ride are practically Flying Dutchman moments. Like straight drop,
similarities
horseshoe,
are uncanny.
Like doing
the vertical loop, the double barrel roll at the end, the helix.
Which we love that ride, by the way. Yeah, having a transition, like a light to fly transition in like a turning high element, that's all very Vekoma Flying Dutchman.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then adding the inline twists instead of doing the corkscrews and having like a giant helix at the end. I really think that the 1018 Batwing Vekoma model
is a huge improvement because you spent so much more time flying in the flying position. I think that's the biggest criticism of Stealth was that you didn't spend more time in the flying position than you did laying on your back.
Yeah, I think it's our roller coaster really calls it the lying down coaster.
At the time, the marketing wasn't even so much that it was they weren't even. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but like they were marketing it as a flying coaster, but when they were developing it, even though it had the product name like Flying Dutchman, it wasn't all about the flying. It was also about laying on your back. Like that was the fact that you were traveling like face first, parallel to the track, was really the main marketing component, and not. I guess like their idea of flying didn't necessarily hinge on being face down and under the track with nothing beneath you, but like flying in the most technical, like in the most, I guess the most basic state was like that. Well, you could be flying on your back too. Like all of it is flying.
Yeah.
But that didn't translate as well, I think, for riders. I feel like for riders, you really only feel like you're flying when you're facing down.
Yeah.
Which is
I think the sensation of rushing on a roller coaster, head first, laying on your back, practically feels like you're inverted the entire time because you're looking upside down. It's like when you lay on the ground or sit in a chair and like you look backwards, like you're kind of, it gives you a sensation that even though you're not completely inverted, like you're kind of hanging inverted. So I even enjoy the parts of the ride that are on your back.
I love the corkscrews on Nighthawk. Like I think they're a really great element, even though flight is not necessarily the first feeling that I think of when I'm experiencing that. It's just great in its own right.
Well, what does work on the corkscrews is almost like the loop. It's like, you have that moment where you look straight down and then you drop on your back again. But yeah, like you did say, there was a lot more time spent on your back on that. As where on the later model, there's a lot more time spent flying. And I think that was really the biggest difference in the two models.
I don't think they realized until after they were riding it in person, like how different the two sensations were. And that, like, going forward, being face down in the fly position was going to be the more marketable
trend
quality of these rides versus the laying down part. I mean, this calls back to Roller Coaster Tycoon, where, like, the Vekoma Flying Dutchman and Roller Coaster Tycoon is called a lay down coaster.
Exactly. And then another ride that's technically part of the Flying Dutchman situation, only one was ever built, you could almost lump it in with the custom rides, is the Stingray. And Stingray was at the Sucho Giant Ferris wheel park. It didn't even make it until we went to Sucho, so that didn't last very long.
It was a well-intended product.
It was quite simple. It was a giant, almost like surfboard-looking ride vehicle, 2 rows of 4. You would fold back just like you would on a Flying Dutchman, and then you would go up a vertical lift, and you would crest the vertical lift, and then you'd be flying in a flying position. You did the same thing. You would do a straight-down drop. You would do one of those nice horseshoe turns, and then there was a couple more elements after which you would then fly into the station, almost like a pretzel loop onto your back. It really wasn't that large of a ride.
But it was
sizable for
a concise
Ferrisville Park.
It's sort of like the footprint and the scope of it reminds me of like a 4D free spin.
Oh, totally.
And like the capacity, like what they were trying to do.
The new Axis coasters, they're really not that big.
Yeah,
but they do something flashy.
And I think it's clever that like going up the lift hill was your lie down, lie flat moment. It was like it had a very fluid moment where like you would dispatch upright, and then as you approached 90 degrees in the lift hill, that's how your seat would lean back kind of simultaneously. I feel like that moment, like doing that so fleshly instead of doing the layback sequence in the station before dispatching, which was like I think the biggest thing that really hindered the early Flying Dutchmans was like dispatch times were so hard. They really like in the original concept for Stealth, the seats would lay back on the lift hill. It was like a separate hydraulic
and they tried doing
system,
that.
And they did.
They tried doing that for Kings Island's Firehawk. After it moved from Six Flags Worlds of Adventure, when it was acquired as X-Flight, and then the trains would not fold back properly, and one train during testing got damaged, and that's why Firehawk, despite being moved as X-Flight to Kings Island as a 3-train ride, it only ever had 2 trains because the third train during testing got damaged because they tried doing the folding
blue
thing
train
on the lift hill and it didn't fold and lock, so it folded back
like
open,
slammed itself back and forth,
and then it got damaged. And it's funny because a good friend of ours who actually got us a track piece of Firehawk, was able to tell me that story while we were having lunch in like Valencia. Funny enough, it's crazy. Anyway, that is the Flying Dutchman situation.
We love flying coasters.
We love flying coasters. And we especially like the Flying Dutchmans. I always have said that I think the Flying Dutchmans are a better product than the flying coasters from B&M.
And I don't think that used to be a hot take.
More intense.
And now it's not. Like,
I think people agree.
The number of people that would take Batwing over Superman Ultimate Flight is
yes,
high.
That was the biggest thing. Like, I'm talking product models.
Yeah.
The
production model.
Production model.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, you can't be like, oh, Batwing is better than Tatsu. Or like, Flying Dinosaur, because these are massive custom rides that are on like mountainsides. And
although
that's hard to say.
Batwing holds its own.
Like, Batwing does hold its own. Don't get me wrong. We love Batwing. But it's a little harder to compare that, like a standard model, to a custom crazy thing like Tatsu or
like a B&M
Superman
Ultimate Flight. Like the one at Six Flags Over Georgia is good, but the one at Great Adventure and Great America on a flat piece of land, B&M really thought they ate, and they didn't. Like they didn't eat the way that they thought that they did.
That's funny.
Tatsu they ate. Like that was all.
And moving on to where Vekoma thought they ate, the Wooden Coaster Collection.
No, Vekoma totally ate.
Vekoma did okay, the Wooden Coaster Collection. I have not ridden all 3 because I'm missing Thunder Coaster. You're missing Loop Garou.
I'm missing Loop Garou.
/ Veerwolf. But the Wooden Coaster was an interesting era for Vekoma because they too entered the race and they were able to sell 3 of them. Of course, 2 of them, the Loop Garou and Robin Hood editions, were due to the crazy amount of rides they were selling at the Six Flags Wallaby and Six Flags Holland transformational windows, in which Six Flags just bought up a bunch of Vekomas, and I'm sure they got a package deal. And I know for a fact Wallaby Holland got a package deal because between La Via Volta, Express, or then Superman, and Robin Hood, they got some sort of package deal.
Yeah.
But and Loop Garou must have also been part of that because they were also building Vekomas left and right at Wallaby, Belgium. But yeah, so let's start with actually Thunder Coaster that you've ridden.
Oh, Thunder Coaster is awesome. I feel like
so different than the other ones.
It's obvious. Like it wasn't exactly a challenge for Vekoma to sell something to Wallaby Holland and Wallaby Belgium for obvious reasons. Like if there was something that existed from Vekoma, that was probably the easiest market was to sell like right outside your doorstep. So Thunder Coaster was really cool. It's the only wooden coaster in Finland. It's the only wooden coaster that has ever been built in Finland and one of very, very few in Scandinavia in general. And they did manage to carve out this little niche of like Vekoma built these roller coasters all very close together, like in very like they were all built within 2 or 3 years of each other, and then the whole product line, I think, retired. But it was like there was a wooden coaster renaissance happening, and Custom Coasters International built a couple coasters in the 90s and then dipped. Like, they never got another client in Europe, and Gravity Group, didn't exist yet. Great Coasters International hadn't made it overseas yet. So, like, there was a brief period of time where the modern wooden roller coaster was having a renaissance all over the world, but there weren't actually that many providers in Europe. Well, it's funny because
there was an episode somewhere in the past, I forget where exactly it was, but we were talking about rides like Bandits, Park Germany, and how when Bandits opened, there were no wooden coasters. Like, now Europe is peppered with them. Yeah. But Europe really was almost strictly steel coasters only. So when Six Flags and Warner Brothers came in earlier in this race, and they started building, for example, Bandit at Movie Park Germany, then Warner Bros. Movie World Germany, and then they also eventually added around the same time as the Loop Garou Robin Hood Thunder Coaster moment, they were installing Coaster Express. This was new for Europe, like having a wooden coaster like Pegasus was early in the race and Efteling. But all things considered, right now you've got so many woodies. Yeah. But when Vekoma was building them, there really weren't that many in Europe. Like, it was a marketable attraction.
Mainland Europe was having a modern wooden coaster renaissance that maybe even eclipsed what the U.S. parks were having, because a lot of U.S. parks were building their second or third wooden coaster via these newer manufacturers.
Those were such an American concept.
These parks in Europe were building their first wooden coasters.
I still remember as a kid, like, riding the wooden coaster in Movie Park Germany. Not to repeat myself, but like we called it the American
roller coaster,
because like the idea of having wooden coaster was so American, and this was right as Robin Hood had opened. Like, this was the Six Flags Holland Warner Bros. Movie World days. Like, like, it was unique to have wooden coasters at your disposal, and especially that close to my house. Yeah.
So basically, to make a long story longer, the wooden coaster product line of Vekoma was born out of this sudden necessity. Like, wooden coasters in mainland Europe were suddenly a hot ticket, and a lot of the developers in the United States didn't quite have the ability to fulfill a European market on top of the American market. So Vekoma's always been so good at following trends and getting in when it was time to get in, and getting out when it was time to get out, because by the mid-2000s, the wooden coaster boom had kind of crashed a little bit. Great Coasters International carried on, but like Custom Coasters International had a bankruptcy. Things started to slow down or just become a little bit more articulated. Things weren't actually happening with the same like swiftness that they were in the 90s and 2000s. Other companies like RCCA would suffer from bankruptcies and lawsuits related to poor fulfillment on their rides and stuff. So like Vekoma came in, did their thing, got out. They built
it's funny. Say what you want, but these are sturdy wooden roller coasters that stood the test of time. That's where a lot of the RCA stuff, for example, did.
I loved the rolling stock. Vekoma's answer to a wooden coaster train was a very interesting, very like old school-esque. Like, it almost had this. Gosh, they kind of looked like steam locomotives. There was just a styling about them that I always thought was cool. Thunder Coaster had a great layout, and I'm really glad that they built this ride. It has it actually runs Gravity Group trains now.
Yeah.
Loop Garou, not only is it the last I guess it's not it's the last of the Vekomas,
but it's an original state.
And it's an original state. The original trains, and obviously Robin Hood is completely gone. In fact, we had a dedicated trip to Wallaby Holland
to ride Robin Hood.
It's
funny because I've ridden Robin Hood a lot as a kid, and I always liked it. And I want to highlight, now that I've ridden both Loop Garou and Robin Hood, and I know enough about Tusenfryd's Thunder Coaster to make this judgment, is Vekoma did a really good job. These are all just completely custom
very
roller coasters.
Different rides.
Like, you would say, like, okay, the manufacturer that spent the entire 90s and early 2000s just cloning at, like, at the successful business rate. The wooden coasters were all uniquely designed. The one at Wallaby Holland was built around like a marsh, around like a swampish, kind of like wetland.
Wallaby Holland, I loved Robin
Hood. And then, of course, Wallaby Belgium's Loop Garou is located also above water and has a really nice long layout with like a helix at the end, which a complete 360 helix on a woody is honestly kind of unique. Mm-hmm. There's not too many of them.
Yeah.
And then Thunder Coaster is a really big sprawling hillside coaster that seems to focus mostly on the hills. They're honestly all very different.
They're fabulous.
You gotta respect that. And it's like a 2-year window in the history.
As much as I love Untamed, like, I miss Robin Hood because I just thought it was a really fun,
OG too.
Unique ride.
And I liked Robin Hood too.
It was a really likable ride.
But so was Untamed. It's a good time. Anyway, so not to spend too much time on the Woodies that people probably forgot they even made those.
Yeah.
We're moving on to the Mine Train collection. We love a good Mine Train.
You finally rode your first, like, classic Vekoma layout Mine Train. I
did.
At Wallaby, Belgium,
just for
this past year.
Months ago, yeah.
I wasn't there.
Time flies. But yeah, so we'll start around. We'll start at the 785 meter model, which there's 7 of them. Calamity Mine, famous from Roller Coaster Tycoon 2, from the Six Flags situation, located in Wallaby, Belgium. That is the OG, awesome ride, love it. I'm glad I got to ride it because I've ridden a knockoff version.
That's right. We rode
Joy World.
The one this is the same park that has Starry Sky Ripper. So not only do they have a B&M flying coaster that reads like a Flying Dutchman, they also have a knockoff Vekoma Mine Train that was built by Golden Horse, I believe.
Yeah, I believe so. And then, or Jimbo Rides, we say.
Something,
which we should mention her in this episode. And then we have Jungle Racing in Happy Valley, Beijing is another example of that. But yeah, it's a classic layout, quite long actually. But then there are longer layouts because they also made 6 custom ones, including Big Thunder Mountain, Railroad, and Disneyland Paris. Yes, it is in Vekoma.
That's right.
It doesn't necessarily have the same traditional Vekoma track. It's in some spots you can see it. And the trains are much more like Disney-fied, so it doesn't have the seats that are in the front, for example. Like in most Vekoma Mine Train coasters, you can sit in the front in the locomotive. There's 2 seats there, which is not even like that comfortable or anything, but it's just cool to sit in the locomotive. Like we did it on Colorado Adventure a couple times. Cool stuff. And yeah, Colorado Adventure, I think my favorite mine train in the world, maybe. I just love Colorado Adventure. It's a fabulous long,
ride.
Crazy, nicely themed ride. In Fantasyland, go figure, intertwines with Chiapas, great ride. Choco Chip Creek coming to Energylandia as part of Sweet Valley opening next year is also a custom ride. Mammoets, which we know from Gardaland, is also a custom one. So these are all kind of custom layouts, and I highly advise you to look into some of these because most of them are really well themed. So Google RCDB them, Google them, YouTube them. Go watch some of these POVs. I love a good mine train.
And then, there's a 7. What's the 7? Oh, okay, I see. Oh, wait.
Did I skip an entire?
No, Roller Coaster Database seems to think that there is also another version of this ride, the 770 meter one.
Oh,
but then there's nothing in there.
No, it must be false. Okay, I figured.
But then there's some that are like, where is
Could have sworn my research was pretty tight here.
It is tight. It's very tight. But where is Iron Horse Freestyle Music Park? Why is this considered a custom? It's literally. Oh, interesting. So apparently, the one that I rode at Hard Rock Park apparently is really similar to the standard, one, right? But it has some slight different shaping in it for whatever reason. This is the one that was manufactured by Chance Rides.
Right.
Because I was looking at it, I'm like, where is the one that I rode? This was the one that I rode that I... Like, it was cool, but then at the same time, it was like, oh, there's no theming for this ride. Also rode the one at Happy Valley Shenzhen, which has apparently been demolished, allegedly.
Yeah, but that's a clone, though, isn't it?
Yeah, that one is the clone. But I was just looking at Roller Coaster Database.
Yeah, I did.
Where is my Iron Horse?
For efficiency purposes.
Yeah, and I'm just saying the ones that I've ridden. But yeah, I guess apparently the one that I rode at Freestyle or at Hard Rock Park is a custom of sorts.
And so the Vekoma lineup of rides, obviously, we barely touched on it so far when it comes to the actual coaster collection, which is about to get a lot more exciting. We're going to be splitting this episode into 2 because we are about to talk about Hyperspace Mountain in Paris and the LSM coaster coming in, and then the whole MKIT 1200 collection of models and rides that I'm sure you've been on and custom rides, all the kind of good stuff. And then we're going to move into all the new stuff. There's lots and lots to discuss still, and we're really excited about it. But since we're already at an hour, we were going to catch you on next episode for that. So next week, tune in again, and we're going to do, I think, the even more exciting part of this Vekoma episode, full of all of your favorites, my favorites, the jibs, praise to Jibs. In the meantime, if you don't mind, leave us a good review or 5 stars, preferably anywhere you're listening, like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Find us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, all the good stuff. And we will catch you on a head and bang in the next episode.
Wait, Chocolate Chip Creek is huge. I thought it was a clone of, like, the standard of the Calamity Mine one. And then I was like, oh, it's even bigger. It's even bigger than Mammut at Gardaland, which is the Calamity Mine that has a third lift hill.
With the third section, yeah.
Chocolate Chip Creek is 1,200 meters long. Like, it's a huge ride.
We love that.
Too bad we can't go there because we're gay.
Yeah.
Anyways, we will pick this up, like you said. And we will be with you with another hour of Vekoma excitement in our next episode.
Sharing is caring. See you next week. Bye.
Bye.